getting together with everybody. Here we are in session 10 of Old Testament survey. We're all the way up to it says here Genesis chapter 15. It seems like it's taking forever, but it won't. We'll be done with Genesis actually fairly soon. Today we're going to cover several chapters. I haven't decided yet exactly how far we'll get, but we're going to get through several chapters. I want to get up through the fall of Sodom and Gomorrah at least. What we're seeing in this section from 15 to about 20 is several more repeats of the Abrahamic covenant. And it comes out in a little different way and a little different emphasis each time. But the core things remain the same. The Abrahamic covenant is a promise of land, a people, the continuation of the messianic seed, to be a king, and the blessing of God on the entire world through Abraham. So all these things are tied together, and ultimately the Abrahamic covenant is essentially unconditional. There are two kinds of contracts that people can make. We can make conditional covenants. If you will do this, then I will do that. So if you give me $10, then I will give you this piece of property that I own. And that's called a contract, and that's very common. Civil law protects contracts, and we know all about contracts. An unconditional contract is when I give something and I expect nothing in return. So if I say to my grandson, this tool is yours now. I no longer have a claim to it. It's yours. You may do whatever you want with it. That's an unconditional covenant. I've made a contract, I've made a promise, and I've tied no conditions to it. I don't imply that if you use the tool wisely, or if you keep it clean, or if you only use it for the sorts of things that I want you to use it for, I say, this is yours. And it's yours forever. You may do whatever you will with it. That's an unconditional covenant. What we're looking at in the promises to Abraham, which form the foundation of all of the biblical promises, is a set of unconditional promises. And so I want us to go into chapter 15, and to do that, we're going to have to share the screen. This always takes a moment, and we'll bring it up. Here we are. So chapter 15 is the ratification of the Abrahamic covenant. Two times so far, God has appeared to Abraham in a variety of ways. First in chapter 12, then chapter 13. We've seen the voice of God, or the call of God. We've seen this go on, and Abraham is given these promises. Chapter 15 is a formalizing of the covenant. It's a fascinating thing, and there are some ancient Near Eastern patterns that we can see here in the background. Some more of that cuneiform language. Those of us who study the Old Testament for a living sometimes get up in the morning and thank God that he did not write the Old Testament in cuneiform. There are like 2,000 different characters, and they're all built around those wedge-shaped marks, usually in wet clay. This particular tablet is on stone, so it had to have been chiseled. But that's still cuneiform writing. At each of those sets of wedge-shaped marks is a syllable, or perhaps a whole word, a sound. And you're required to memorize the shape and repeat the sound. much like modern English teachers in this country use the look-see method. They tell you to look at a word and just remember that that particular shape of word says this thing. That's a very, very inefficient way to learn language. And the advantage of having an alphabet, like we do in English and Tagalog and Italian and the other languages that we use, is that you can learn what each of the letters means. Hebrew has an alphabet, which is really, really handy. It means anybody can learn to read Hebrew. Really, I'm not kidding when I say that anybody can. Okay, so here we are. That was a rabbit trail. Here we are in chapter 15. After these things, that is after the rescue of Lot and the blessing of Melchizedek, fascinating event all by itself. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision to the effect, "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great." Okay, there's God's general statement of promise. I'm your God, fear not, I'm your shield, your reward will be very great. But Abram said, "O Lord, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus." And that little detail suggests that one of the slaves or servants in Abram's household would become his heir. Now, this is something that we don't expect. In the modern world, we think of slavery as a totally evil and utterly oppressive institution. And in many of the places where slavery was practiced, in the Roman Empire, for instance, and later on in the Muslim Caliphate, and even in the American slavery in the Old South, slaves were considered property. They had no rights, they had no privileges, and they had no hope of a future. But in many parts of the ancient world, slavery was more of it was more of a just economic system. And we can see this with Eliezer of Damascus. This is a servant. He was born in Abram's household, probably to a couple who were also servants within the household. And as such, he had opportunities and privileges under the law. And here we're talking about ancient Middle Eastern law. Eleazar, being the eldest child born within the household, the oldest male child born within the household, would become the heir of the master of the house in the event of his death. That was Mesopotamian law. And it happened fairly regularly. We find examples of this in the clay tablets that we find in Mesopotamia. So Abraham is just telling God the law, and God says, "No, it's not going to work that way." And God said, "This man shall not be your heir." This is 5:4. "Your very own son shall be your heir." Okay, now later on, God is going to have to make it even more explicit than that. And he brought him outside and said, "Look toward the heaven and number the stars if you're able to number them." He said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Now, that's a very important idea. The offspring of Abraham will be, one, the Jewish people, but also in a very real way, all those who share in the blessing of Abraham. That makes you and I, in a very real way, the offspring of Abraham. We are part of that stars of the sky offspring collection. He said, "Look toward the heaven, number the stars if you're able to." And verse 6, 15:6, is one of the key passages in the Old Testament. 15:6 is a verse that we should all have underlined in our Bibles. This reports of Abraham, and he believed the Lord, and he, the Lord, accounted it to him as righteousness. I need to draw that on the whiteboard. So I'm going to pause this share. Let's see if I can make this work. Share another one. Okay, I have to stop this share altogether. So I've stopped it, and now I'm here. Okay. What does it say? He believed God. There's that word. And he accounted it, or counted it, as righteousness. Now, the thing to understand here is that all of these terms that we're looking at, to believe takes us back to the faith concept. The accounting is a word that over in the New Testament is going to be translated reckoned, or something similar. This is the accounting term, the legal word, the forensic word, that has to do with writing down in the ledger a thing that is known to be true. So if you write in your checkbook that you've deposited 100 euros in your account, and you really haven't done that, then that would be fraud. That would be illegal. That's the wrong thing to do. If you count something, it's already true. So this is where the concept of justification, let me get that. This is where the principle of justification by faith comes in. Righteousness is that standard, the absolute standard of right and wrong that reflects the character of God. So this is a verse that is foundational. It is basic to the book of Romans, for example, and also the books of Ephesians and Galatians. The Apostle Paul builds his entire doctrine of justification by faith on this concept. The same words, the words to believe, to account, and the righteousness of God, the same words are used throughout Paul's theology. This is basic. So again, Genesis 15:6 should be a memory verse for all of us. This is one that we'll use a lot. Okay, I'm going to kill that. And we're going to go back to the, see if I can make the share screen come up again. I think that'll be easy enough. Ooh, there we go. So, God counted it as righteousness. And then he said to him, that is, God said to Abram, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldees to give you this land to possess. Now you'll notice that in this passage, as this develops, the emphasis of chapter 15 is on the unconditional gift of the land to Abraham's descendants. And so the descendants are included here. And the idea that one day this would be a kingdom is not particularly mentioned in this chapter. The emphasis, though, is on the land. So I promised to give you this land to possess it. And Abraham said, "Oh, Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it?" The question there in verse 8 is actually legitimate, because at the time that Abraham is asking the question, he possesses nothing. He's a nomad. He wanders from place to place. Even Lot owns more. He's got a house in the city with a nice business and all the good things in life. We're going to find out that that doesn't amount to very much. But at this point, Abraham, still called Abram, owns nothing. He's got some camels, some sheep, he's got some servants in his household. And how shall I know that I'm going to possess all of this wonderful wealth? And he, God, said to him in verse 9, "Bring me a heifer 3 years old, and a female goat 3 years old, and a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." Okay, now we would think, just looking at this, we would say to ourselves, that's not much of an answer. Abram has asked for some reassurance that he would in fact inherit what God had promised, and God says, "Go get me a heifer, a goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a pigeon." And I think it's appropriate to ask, what does that have to do with this covenant? And you'll notice that Abram didn't ask that question. Abram knew what was being asked of him, and he went and took care of it. He brought him all of these and cut them in half and laid each half over against the other. We can visualize a pathway. I'll show you the next slide so you see what I'm saying. Oops, here is a pathway. Visualize a line of animals cut in half on this side and then on this side of the path. That's the picture that we're being asked to visualize. The cut up animals are laid on either side of the path. And he brought them all, and when the birds of prey came down, Abram drove them away. Okay, so this is going to stay for a while. And as the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. Now that's important. We'll see the rest of the picture here. "And behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram," in this solemn event, the Lord said to Abram, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not their own, and will be servants there. And they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation they serve. Afterward, they will come out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age." And they came, and they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So this is a prediction of the history of the people of Israel. God predicts here that Abram, you're going to go to your fathers at a good old age, but your offspring, who will become a very great nation, will be servants in another land, a land not their own. That was Egypt. And they will be afflicted for 400 years. Interesting number there. The actual length of the sojourn was 430 years. It's entirely possible that the affliction of Israel didn't begin until after the death of Joseph, and so 400 years would be very close to the the accurate number. Some have argued that the affliction of Israel didn't begin until quite a bit later and that this is a round number. It doesn't matter. The the overall chronology is close enough for biblical purposes. It doesn't need to be any more accurate than that. The New Testament picks up on this number rather than the 430 number. But that nation will be judged. The judgment of Egypt is going to take place in the crossing of the Red Sea. So anyway, we see the prediction of this people coming back to this place, having judged Egypt, and will inherit this land. So the repeating of the covenant. And when the sun had gone down, and it was dark, this is verse 17, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between the pieces. The firepot and the torch, interesting. It has to be a symbol of God. Later on, we're going to see God as a fire by night and a pillar of smoke by day. As he leads the people through the wilderness. This is an example of the glory of God, the visible manifestation of the invisible character of God. And on that night, or on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham. Now, the word "make a covenant" is unique here in this passage. This says he cut a covenant. The word covenant itself, barit, derives from the verb to cut. Well, what is all of this about? We know from ancient Near Eastern cuneiform tablets, like the one you see here, that in the ancient world, when two kings would get together and throw a war, they would beat up on one another, and their men would beat up on each other for a while until somebody decided that there'd been enough of that, and the loser would give up. He'd set down his arms, and the winner would declare that, I've won this. Now we need to settle this argument and go about having some kind of a peace. And so they would work out a peace treaty. And when the two kings made up their minds on a peace treaty, they would cut a covenant. And to do that, they would go out and get these animals, sacrificial animals, which would be cut in two and laid on opposite sides of a path. It was really a very bloody, a very brutal thing to do. It was a kind of a gross practice. And so the animals laid on two sides, and then the two kings would walk together down that line of cut up animals and announce to one another and to the assembled armies, let him who first breaks this covenant of ours become like these dead animals. And we find that in the Hittite covenants and also in the Mesopotamian covenants. This is something that Abraham was already familiar with. God didn't have to instruct him. God said, go get the animals. Abraham said to himself, we're going to cut a covenant. And so Abraham apparently expected to stay awake for this thing, but a deep sleep fell on him, so that when it came time for the two kings to walk through the cut covenant together, Abram was asleep and God walks through the covenant ceremony alone. The symbolism is really clear. God is saying, this covenant depends on me alone. I will do this thing. You will be a great nation. You will inherit this land. You will be the father of a star field full of descendants, and all the nations through you will be blessed. That's the promise. And God says it depends on me, not on you. So this is by its nature an unconditional covenant. So on that day, the Lord cut a covenant with Abram, saying, to you and your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river the Euphrates, land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. This is, by the way, here in verse 19, 20, 21, the description of the promised land includes a nation list, the Canaanite nation list. This is the long form. All of the nations that would be in Canaan are included here. Some of them we know. Some of them we know very little about. There are some like the Perizzites, concerning whom all we have is their name. Some of the others we know actually a great deal about, and quite a bit has been studied. But this is the long form. Later on, we're going to normally go down to a short form of just 8 nations. That takes us into the sequence that will end up with, it's not going to be Eliezer of Damascus. Abram, you're going to have a son. Oh, how exciting is that? And so we're going to have a sequence here that's going to lead us up to chapter 22, which is the sacrifice of Isaac. The promised son is the key idea here. And again, the issue is that Abram and Sarah had no children. And we're going to see some more of that in chapter 17, but this is the theme of the whole thing. Abram and Sarah were infertile. There were no children, let alone sons. Abram had no heir. Eliezer of Damascus could not be his heir. So someone from his own body. Okay, let's see what we can do with that. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. So Sarai's suggestion was that Abram should go in to Hagar as he would with a wife, and the child born to Hagar would be Abram's son. Abram made a really bad mistake here. The next line, and Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. That was a mistake. What he should have done was something to the effect of, oh, Sarah, you know better than that. I could never do a thing like that. Far be it from me to ever take another wife. You're my wife forever, for better or worse, and we'll just let God work it out. That would have been an act of faith. That would have been an act of integrity. It would have been a good thing. On the other hand, Sarah's suggestion demonstrates her lack of faith. Abram's agreement to go along with this demonstrates his lack of faith. Both of them were sinning in this. And naturally, as it happened, Abram's wife took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, gave her to Abram as her husband, as his wife. She went in to Hagar. She conceived right away, no problem. And then she looked with contempt on her mistress. Now, that's a big surprise, right? And Sarai said to Abram, may the wrong done to me be on you. Now, wait a minute. Sarai is the one who came up with this idea. But she's right here. Abram should never have listened. He should never have agreed. So this whole thing is a mess. This was a very wrong thing for them to do, and it demonstrates a tremendous lack of faith. So you're wrong. And now we have this division between Abram and Sarai, which is sad. And I'm not sure this ever entirely heals. And I gave you my servant to embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarah, behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. This was also not a good thing for Abram to do. So Sarai dealt harshly with her. Now, Hagar is the one who is least to be blamed in all of this. She's a servant within the household, for heaven's sakes. Abram and Sarai agreed that this was a good thing to do, and Sarai was completely, or Sarai had power over Hagar. Hagar is the least to be blamed, although Hagar should probably also have disagreed. Nevertheless, I don't blame her. So Sarai dealt harshly. And then the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water. She'd driven away out in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. Now, Shur is way out in the middle of nowhere. There's a spring on the way. The only spring I know of in the Negev between Hebron and Shur would be Avdat. And I think I've shown you some pictures of that. It's way out in the middle of nowhere, and the water just pops up. I think that's a place that also is found on the route of the Exodus. Anyway, this is the spot where Hagar went. And the angel of the Lord came to her there and said, where have you come from and where are you going? She said, I'm fleeing from my mistress. The angel of the Lord said, return to your mistress, submit to her. And he also said, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. So Ishmael will become also, like Abraham, a great nation. Now, that's both good news and bad news. It's good news for Hagar. She's come on hard times, and this has not been a good, healthy relationship for Hagar. And so something good comes of this, a great multitude of people. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant, you shall bear a son, you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. And the name Ishmael is from Shema, and it means God hears. So God has heard your prayer. You shall call his name Ishmael because the Lord has listened to your affliction. And then we get a description of Ishmael, which is not such a great blessing when you look at it. He shall be a wild donkey of a man. Instead of a domesticated donkey, which can do useful work, he'll be a wild donkey. Off he goes. You can never predict where he's going to go next. His hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him. He will spend his entire career fighting with people. Oh, well, that's also not particularly good news. And he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. That's a difficult phrase to translate into just about anything except Hebrew. In Hebrew, this suggests that this place where you live, this place that we call Israel today, is Abram's home, and this is the home for all the brethren of Ishmael, which would be the Jewish people. And over against means on the other side. So the other side of the Jordan will be where Ishmael lives. In fact, historically, we see that Ishmael becomes the the progenitor, the first father of many of the Arabic-speaking tribes. Not all. It would be wrong to say that Ishmael is the father of all the Arabs, because that simply isn't true. But many of the nomadic tribes who live along the rim of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula can probably be traced back to Ishmael. The Arabs are, by definition, the word Arab means a mixed race. The Arabs are a mixed group. They come from a lot of different locations, a lot of different backgrounds. Ishmael is a part of that. When we get to Lot, we're going to find a couple of others. Later on, when we get to Jacob, we're going to find yet another source for the Arabic-speaking peoples. And those people groups form the foundation of resistance to Israel to the present day. The Quran, the holy book of Islam, claims that the Bible made a big mistake here because Isaac isn't supposed to be the child of promise. Ishmael is supposed to be the child of promise. So the verse here that says Ishmael won't be your that one doesn't really make any sense. It's really Ishmael, and the whole rest of the Bible just got it wrong. They should have followed the line of Ishmael. Needless to say, I suppose we Christians don't believe that. Neither do the Jewish people. And in fact, any careful study of the Bible and history will demonstrate that the Arabic-speaking peoples have in fact been nomads. They have lived over against their brethren. They have been warlike and difficult to work with throughout all of history. This is an apt description of the Arabic tribal peoples. There are some very nice people out there, but this is a good description of the overall set of nations. We'll see more of that later. So she called the name of the on the name of the Lord there, which is really cool. Hagar is apparently a believer. She called on the name of the Lord. She said, "You are a God of seeing." And El Roi, the God who sees me. For she said, truly here I have seen him who looks after me. Therefore, the well was called Bir Lahai Roi, and it lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son. Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So there we have yet another milepost. We start the story off when Abram is 75. Now he's 86, was 11 years later. And we're going to see the next milepost just a little bit farther along in chapter 17. Here we see the introduction of the covenant of circumcision. The circumcision continues to be practiced amongst the Jewish people to this day. It's a small cutting of the foreskin of Jewish babies. Doesn't hurt them particularly. They get over it right away. Babies heal almost instantly. It's not a huge thing, and yet circumcision is something that is easily visible to Jewish men. They recognize one another as Jewish men when they, go to the shower together or something like that at a gymnasium. The circumcision is known to a man's mother and father. It's known to a man's wife. It's known to the other men. It's a sign of the covenant. Anyway, here we see the laying down of that covenant stipulation. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty, El Shaddai here. Walk before me and be blameless, that I may make my covenant between you and me, and may multiply you greatly. So here's an interesting passage here. There seems to be a condition placed on the covenant. You must practice this rite of circumcision, and when you do that, you will receive the blessings of the covenant. The covenant is unconditional. We saw that in chapter 15. But in chapter 17, God adds a condition for the blessing under the covenant. That's this rite of circumcision. Abraham would not have lost his salvation if he failed in the rite of circumcision, but he would have lost some of the blessing of that covenant. The circumcision was meant as an outward sign of an inward relationship to God, and it applied to the whole people. It's really quite different from the rite of baptism that is given to us in the New Testament. It's an entirely different thing. And the difference there is something that we would want to study when we study the history of the church, because it ends up being very important. But for now, just recognize that circumcision is meant to be a physical outward sign, an object lesson of the inward relationship that the Jewish people have to God, and to whatever extent it works. So God said, I'm going to make my covenant with you. And Abram fell on his face and said, behold, my covenant is with you. You shall be the father of a multitude. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. This is in verse 5. Abram means great father, or as I like to say, big daddy. Av, AB is father, Ram is great or large or huge, as our President Trump likes to say. So Big Daddy makes a good translation. Avraham is it includes the word Am in it. Avraham means father of a great nation. So it's a subtle change and yet a fairly important change. Avram is changed to Avraham. You're going to be the father of a great nation. I've made you the father of a multitude. I will make you exceedingly fruitful. I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. I will establish my covenant between you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring. And I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So here's a prediction, God reverting very clearly to the unconditional mode. I will establish my covenant throughout all of their generations. This is an everlasting covenant. The covenant has never been destroyed. The covenant can never be rescinded. This is the covenant of God with the people of Israel forever. And the focus of the covenant in this section is the land and the relationship to God as chosen people. God said to Abraham here in verse 9, as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you throughout all their generations. This is my covenant between me and you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins. It shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male throughout your generations, whether born in your house or bought with your money from a foreigner, was not your offspring, but born in the house. And he who is bought with money, you shall surely circumcise. So shall my covenant be with you. Okay, there's that external sign. We're going to pop up with that again in the New Testament, but to this day, that is the sign of the covenant amongst the Jewish people. It sets them apart as a separate nation. The important thing in chapter 17 is the reiteration of the covenant to Abraham. This is an unconditional covenant of land and blessing. The blessing is conditional on obedience, but the relationship is forever. The land is forever. The promise of the universal blessing is forever, and it's unconditional. So we go from there into chapter 18. I told you I was going to cover some ground today. We'll at least get through chapter 19, I think. Maybe we'll get a little farther than that. I hope so. So the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre. Oh, wait a minute. I need to. I've forgotten the prediction of Isaac's birth. I left off at 17:14. Let's go on to verse 15. God said to Abram, "As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah," which is a nice little change of name. Her name had meant princess in the Mesopotamian dialect. In Hebrew, Sarah still means princess, which is really a nice name, nice thing for God to call them. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. Go, yeah, that's important. So not only will Ishmael not be your heir, you will have a son by Sarah. I will bless her. She shall become nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Which is a good question. Now, today, of course, that would be very unlikely. In the ancient world, by the time of Abraham, this was still a fairly unlikely thing. It was not something that happened easily. Shall I have a child at this age? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. God said, no. God said, no. But Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. So here's the prediction of Isaac, and we predict him by name. I'll establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant. So the unconditional covenant runs through the line of Isaac. As for Ishmael, I've heard you. Behold, I've blessed him. I'll make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes. And I'll make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. And when he'd finished, God went up from Abraham. Then Abraham took Ishmael, his son, and all those who were born. Hang on, I've got to make some muting happen here. There we go. Kill that. Okay. Abraham took Ishmael, and everyone was circumcised, which would have laid the grown-ups down for several days. That would be somewhat painful. Then we get to chapter 18. And very shortly after this, the Lord appeared by the oaks of Mamre. Here Abraham heads north. He heads back to the oaks of Mamre, which is near Hebron. As he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day, he lifted up his eyes, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. This is a bit of ancient Near Eastern Bedouin hospitality instruction. The whole passage has a very Arab kind of a feel to it, and a desert kind of feel to it. So there Abram is at the door of his tent, and he lifts up his eyes, and behold, way off in the distance, here are 3 men with their camels. And this is to be expected. When the 3 men came within eyesight of Abraham's tent, they stopped their camels. They got off their camels. They took down some, maybe a coffee pot. They built a fire and began to make what could have looked like a camp. And that's how it's done, actually. When today, if you're out in the Sinai, where the Bedouins still roam quite freely, or out in the boundary lands of the state of Jordan, way out in the desert, where the Bedouin roam freely, if you're a traveler and you come across a Bedouin encampment, as soon as you see them, you stop. You don't want to approach a Bedouin camp without an invitation. That's considered very impolite behavior. That's the sort of thing that barbarians might do. It's an impolite thing to do. You don't want to intrude on somebody's privacy, and so you stop at the edge of eyesight, and there you stop your truck. And typically, if you're out in a place like that, you've got 2 trucks, 2 drivers, at least 1 guide, and the encampment already knows you're coming because they called them on a cell phone. But in the ancient world, no cell phones, so you'd stop. And at that distance, you can see that the camp is way over there, and they can see you, and this is perhaps a kilometer or so of distance. And after a bit, the visitors set up, and they're making coffee, and somebody from the camp will come out to the visitors. And that's what Abraham does here. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, "O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought. I'll wash your feet, and then let a meal be prepared for you, and we'll take care of you." This is normal Bedouin hospitality, and to this day, we'll see the same ritual played out. When I have done this, my guide has made the arrangement ahead of time, and the Bedouin knew that we were coming. And yet still, when we stopped, the Bedouin actually rode on a camel out to meet us, greeted us, went through the ritual in Arabic, and my guide said all of the right words, and we all were led into camp. And a meal was prepared for us, and there we spent the night. It was really quite interesting, if not entirely pleasant. The tents of the Bedouin are often infested with fleas, and so it wasn't an entirely comfortable night. But it was very interesting to see the hospitality. The rule is that when you are invited into camp, you go with peace. So salam, and the response is salam alaikum. And then salam alaikum kahaf. It goes on from there. And there's a ritual that is shared between the visitor and the host. And what they're basically doing is guaranteeing peace to one another. And when there's a guarantee of peace from the host to a visitor, that implies 3 days of protection from whoever's chasing you. This is taken very seriously out in the desert. For if someone is running away from enemies, the Bedouin encampment is his only hope. And whatever comes, if a war follows this, then the Bedouin host has obligated himself to take care of things. If that's not the case, then he's obligated himself to food and lodging for 3 days, which is quite a deal and a fairly difficult thing. So what Abram is doing here, what Abraham now is doing here, is Bedouin hospitality. So the three men who are the Lord and two angels agree. Go take care of the water for our feet and go have a meal made. Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, quickly, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it and make cakes. Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, gave it to a young man to prepare it quickly. So bread and meat are being prepared for a meal. Now, the bread would be fairly simple to make. You take the bread and mix it up. It's bread with some water. There would be no yeast in this. The bread would be put on the outside of a clay oven to make what we know today as pita. And I think you can get pita. Go to a gyros shop in Italy. We find those all over the place, and you can get pita in Italy. Greece, it's more common, and in the rest of the Middle East, it's pretty easy to get pita bread. That's what we're talking about, either pita or matzah, kind of a cracker. The meat would be a young calf slaughtered right on the spot and cooked over the fire. It would not have taken a long time, but it was obviously not fast food. This would have taken an hour or so. And in the ancient world, that was a fairly normal thing. This was not an unusual thing for Abraham to do. He brought the food to them and then stood by while they ate. And they said, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Which is a very unusual question for visitors to ask a man. That's something you would never say. And Abraham said, "Well, she is in the tent." Of course, she was in the tent. The women of a Bedouin encampment never make themselves visible to visitors. That would be just wrong. Now, little girls do. Children go out and play, and they play together, and they go out and greet the visitors. That's no problem. But grown women stay hidden within the tent. They stay behind some kind of cover. So this is actually very unusual. And the Lord said, here God himself speaking, we don't know what he looked like, what human form he may have taken on. We're simply not told. I will surely return to you about this time next year. Now, you'll notice this is a repeat of what God has already said in verse 21 of the previous chapter. I'll establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear at this time next year. The Lord is coming again to repeat the promise, which is fascinating. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh?" Why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed have pleasure now, or shall I bear a child now that I am old? Verse 14 is another memory verse that we should know. Is anything too hard for the Lord? In other words, um, what God is predicting of Sarah is going to require a miracle. Abraham is old. Sarah is old. It has ceased to be with them after the manner of men and women. In other words, they're not having any more children. This is something that might have happened earlier, but it's not going to happen anymore. We're all done with that. Uh, the idea of death, the lack of life, is clear here, and the miracle that's going to be required is the production of life in the midst of death. Life where there was death. This becomes a key biblical theme. Where does life come from? Life comes from God. When we go back to the creation story, where does life come from? God breathes life into that which is mere inert matter. God is the source of life. And here again, he demonstrates, is anything too difficult for the Lord? Let me show you. I will make life where there was only death. And so there's the promise. Is anything too difficult? At the appointed time, I will return. About this time next year, Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I didn't laugh, because she was afraid. So she said, I didn't laugh. And God said, oh no, you laughed. The point being, at this time next year, God is going to be back, and we'll see who gets the last laugh. Sarah laughed. Abraham thought it was probably a great joke. But now everybody is not so sure. God says, I'll be back this time next year. We'll see who's laughing then. Interestingly, the name Isaac means he laughs. And we can wonder, I'm sure Isaac laughed. I'm sure Abraham and Sarah laughed. But I'm sure also that God, sitting in his heaven, looking down at the camp of Abraham and Sarah with his new baby boy, I'm sure God laughed. So I'll be back, and we'll see what happens with this promise. And then the men set out from there, and Abraham went with them to set them on their way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? And now we see the prediction of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, this is verse 20, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. And then Abraham intercedes for Sodom. This is in the last part of chapter 18. This is a bargaining session between God and Abraham. It is a fascinating thing. Abraham drew near and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And of course, Abraham is thinking about his nephew Lot and his wife. And Abraham also knows that Lot has two daughters. So he's got relatives who live there. Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Abraham knows that there are wicked people in Sodom. Very likely everybody knows that there are wicked people in Sodom. That was not likely a big secret. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you sweep away the place and not spare it for 50 righteous? And God says, okay, 50 righteous, I'll spare the place. Abraham answered and said, well, do you mind if I'm a little bold? Perhaps we're 5 short. Will you destroy the place for lack of 5? And he said, okay, if I find 45, how about 40? Would you go for 30? How about 20? Maybe 10? What Abraham is doing here is haggling. He's bargaining. He's trying to come up with a fair price. Would you go for 10? I love this in the marketplaces in the Middle East. I've done this in Jerusalem primarily, in the old city of Jerusalem. When you go into an Arab shop, you're expected to haggle. The first price is never the price that you will pay, unless you're a fool. They hope. And so, here is I would walk into a shop. One of my favorite shops in Jerusalem used to be the shop of a fellow I called Ahmed the Grave Robber. I never knew his real name. He was an elderly fella, great big guy, nice guy, who had a bunch of grandkids, and each of the grandkids would keep an eye on a separate pottery shop. And I remember going to this guy's shop, and I noticed a little piece of pottery, a little juglet that was imitation pottery, imitation chocolate on white. Now, the real chocolate on white came from overseas, from the island of Crete. But the imitation chocolate on white was a sign of the second part of the late Bronze Age, right after the conquest. So it's actually a fairly important piece of pottery. And I saw a piece of imitation chocolate on white, and I thought, wow, that would be kind of fun to have. And so I picked it up, and the little boy who was there, the grandson, ran and got his father, or his grandfather, and Ahmed the Grave Robber himself came back to me. He says, "Oh, Dr. McMahon, this is so good to see you again. You do me great honor by coming to visit my humble shop. How may I be of service to you this day?" And so I noticed, well, I was just noticing this pot. This is a very nice one. And I went to put it back. He took it out of my hand, and he said, "For you, my friend, a special deal. Today, I give you the pot." I said back to him, this was the way the ritual is done. "Oh, my friend, I could not dishonor you by taking so fine a gift. Please tell me what is the value of a pot of this great quality?" He said, "My friend, for you," and he put it in my hands. "I make you a gift. This is for you. For what is $500 between friends?" And then I had the price, and I knew how much he wanted for the thing. I said, "Oh, that is such a fine gift, but you dishonor me. I could not possibly take such a gift." And I went to set it down again. He took it back and gave it to me. I said, "For you this day, because you're my first customer, a special deal. For you, $200." And he kept coming down till he finally couldn't go any further. I couldn't go any higher. I put the pot back on the wall and I walked out. But that's haggling. And this is exactly what Abraham is doing here. He talked God down as far as he thought the market would bear. "Would you go for 10? And you'll notice God doesn't reply. The Lord just went his way. He walked away from this. And when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. And that takes us to chapter 19, which is the final statement of the destruction of Sodom. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. And when Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, 'My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house, spend the night, wash your feet, then you may rise up early and go on your way.'" Okay, stop here for just a second. So Lot has a place in the gate. He was sitting in the gate. The gate of a city is the main commercial center of the city. The gate forms the hub of the piazza. In an Italian city, we call it a piazza. And this is the marketplace. The gate usually has a roof over the top, and it's not a very big area, and there's room for 4 or 8 or 10 businessmen to set up their own little shops. So Lot is a very prosperous man in Sodom. He's got a seat in the gate. He's one of the financial kingpins of the city of Sodom. He's very important there. Inside, he has a house, apparently nearby the piazza of the city. Again, this is the high rent district. This is an expensive house. Lot has done very well for himself here in Sodom. We're going to see what comes of that. So he says to the 2 angels, God himself has gone away. This theophany has disappeared, and we have the 2 angels. And they said, come in, spend the night with me. I'll feed you. Then you get up very early and get out of here. Because Lot, in spite of his prosperity in Sodom, knew what kinds of evil was going on in this city. And they said, oh no, we'll spend the night in the town square. We'll spend the night in the piazza. Lot knew what sorts of things happened out in public at night. He knew what kind of men he was surrounded by. But Lot pressed them, so they turned aside. He made a feast. But before they lay down, all of the men of the city, the men of the Sodom, young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house and asked, what? Bring out those men who came into you, that we may know them. Now they're asking for sexual relationships with the 2 angels. Now, anybody with any sense would realize this is a bad mistake. The men of Sodom should probably not have been asking this, but it's obvious what their great sin was. Today, the word in English, sodomy, reflects the central act of homosexuality. So these men were homosexual, and they were intending to do those acts with the visitors to the city. That was their intention. Lot clearly knew about this. Men of the city came. They said, where are the men? Bring them out. Lot went out to the men, said, I beg you, my brothers. Interesting use there. Do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who've not yet known any man. Let me bring them out. Imagine how the daughters felt with this announcement. I have 2 daughters who've not known a man. Let me bring them out. You may do as you please, only do nothing to these men. There's that law of hospitality. And at what cost? Look what Lot is losing as a result of his decision to live in Sodom. But they said, stand back. This fellow came in to sojourn, but he's become our judge. We're going to deal worse with you than with them. And they pressed hard. Lot Lot was pushed back. They drew near to break down the door, and the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house, and then struck the men with blindness. And they wore themselves out, even blind, groping for the door. And the 2 men said, have you anyone here? The question is apt. You've been here for years. You've built a business. You know these people. Who have you shared your faith with? Because obviously God has allowed Lot to live in the city so that he could be a witness for righteousness in an unrighteous place. God has put all of us in unrighteous places. The point is for us to be a witness where God has placed us. That's the point of the exercise. Who do you have? He says, well, I've got 2 daughters and they have fiancés. So Lot went to his sons-in-law and told them that the Lord was about to destroy the place. They thought he was joking. He'd never talked about the Lord before. He told his wife, "We've got to get out of here." They begged to stay in a place that's close by, that's called Zoar. The angels agreed with that, but they said, "Don't look back." Getting out of the valley, running away from Sodom, the fire and brimstone were coming down. Lot's wife looked back, and we're told she turned into a pillar of salt. Lot took his daughters and ran to Zoar, but the next day they ran into the hills. And the valley of the Dead Sea that you see in this photograph was destroyed with fire and with brimstone, perhaps some kind of a volcanic event, although the valley itself doesn't show volcanic stuff. It shows sedimentary rock, sandstone on the far side and limestone on the near side where I'm standing. It then dropped 1,000 feet or so and began filling up with salt water. Very, 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 very dreadful place, a place of judgment today. This is when that happened. And as Lot ran away with his daughters, he went up into the hills. And after some time passed by, the two daughters despaired of ever seeing any other human beings. So they got their father drunk somehow and had sex with him. They both conceived and bore children. Those sons were Moab and Ammon. Moab and Ammon. The Moabites and the Ammonites are two more enemies. So now we've got the Ishmaelites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites. Look at the cost to Lot. He lost his family. He lost his wife. He lost his daughters. He laid the foundation for eternal hatred on the part of the Moabites and the Ammonites to this day. The Moabites and the Ammonites, who are now part of the larger Arab people group, have declared their animosity towards Israel. So this is a kind of a low point, a good place to stop for now. We're at the point where God has promised a great deal to Abraham. He has promised a covenant and a land and everything else, but now here in the midst of it, we see the destruction of Sodom. So on Monday, we'll come back and see what happens with Isaac. In the midst of all this destruction, is God still going to be capable of coming through with his promises to Abraham? Does God keep his covenant even when bad things happen to good people? So, love you guys. I'm going to see if I can unmute everybody and change over to the gallery view. Good to see everybody. We miss getting to be there with you. One of these days, we will come back to Italy, and we will see you all. Love you guys. It looks like Donna is coming up. I don't think we've got Deborah. Deborah seems to have turned into a pumpkin.
She did. She turned into a pumpkin.
Yeah. Bye-bye, everybody. Love you all. We'll see you on Monday.
Dr. John, thank you so much.
Happy weekend.
Oh, my pleasure entirely.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Willie, bye-bye. All right, Joel. We'll see you guys. Bye-bye.
See you.
Yeah, we got to end this one. And then we're gonna leave.
Buonanotte tutti. Good night.
Bye-bye.